Welcome to Inside Voices, a well-read magazine, Between the Pages podcast. I'm Robert Gwaltney, joined by my dear friend and co-host, Jeffrey Dale Lofton. Jeffrey and I are both very excited to enter into conversation today with author Lou Bayard. Welcome, Lou.
It's so great to see you both.
Good to see you. So, Lou, before we get started, I'm going to share a little bit about you with our listeners. In the words of the New York Times, Lou Bayard reinvigorates historical fiction, rendering the past as if he'd witnessed it firsthand. His acclaimed novels include The Wilds, chosen as one of the top 10 historical novels of the year by the New York Times, The Pale Blue Eye, adapted into the global #1 Netflix release starring Christian Bale, Jackie Me, ranked by the Washington Post as one of the top novels of 2022, the national bestseller, Courting Mr. Lincoln, Roosevelt's Beast, The School of Night, The Black Tower, and Mr. Timothy, as well as the highly praised young adult novel, Lucky Strikes. His reviews and articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and Salon, and he is a contributing writer to the Washington Post book world. A former instructor at George Washington University, he was chair of the Faulkner Awards and the author of the popular Downton Abbey recaps for the New York Times. His work has been translated into more than a dozen languages. Jeffrey?
Lou, we're so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here, always.
So, I have a question for you. The Wilds gives us not only the mythic Oscar Wilde alone, but he also gives us his family, the family who lived with him and well beyond him. What drew you to tell their story? And how did you find your way into their world, their emotional world?
I think what drew me to their story was the fact that nobody knew they existed. In so many cases, when you tell most people that Oscar Wilde had a wife and two children, two boys, they're astonished to hear that. Because I think the Oscar we've received, that we've inherited through the years, is this great gay martyr of Victorian England who was broken and imprisoned and eventually killed, in fact, for espousing the love that dare not speak his name and for committing acts of gross indecency. So most people that I run into, even very well educated folks, are astonished to hear that he had a wife, that he had children. But it's not just that; it's the fact that they had a very their own serious kind of character arc in the wake of his scandal. In the wake of his being imprisoned, they basically had to flee London and flee England and make lives for themselves under new names. They adopted the last name of Holland, and they each led very sad and in many ways tragic lives that most people don't know about. So I thought, okay, this is what a historical novelist does. He takes the story that hasn't been told at all or told enough and puts it front and center. So that's where that came from.
Acts of gross indecency. That sort of summarizes my 20s.
my early 20s for sure, yes.
Yeah.
But it summarizes a lot of heterosexual action as well. So yeah, I don't think it needs to be compartmentalized into sodomy necessarily. But yes, that was the legal term by which Oscar Wilde was convicted. And I should add that "love that dare not speak his name" was not his phrase. That was the phrase of his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. That was the final line of a poem that Douglas wrote called Two Loves. So if that title resonates, if that phrase resonates for you, it's because Douglas was the one who came up with it first.
It was Douglas.
Yeah.
So Lee, you've often reimagined real historical figures, Poe, Mary Todd Lincoln, Roosevelt, with empathy and imagination. What was it about the Wilde family that called to you?
Well, kind of what I was alluding to before, which is the fact that most people don't know Oscar had a family, but also the fact that they had this unique and separate journey, each of them, in the wake of Oscar's scandals. So, for instance, Oscar's older son became a sniper in World War I for the British Army. Who would have guessed Oscar Wilde's older son would become a sniper. His wife wound up kind of migrating to through Europe and ending up in the Ligurian coast of Italy, struggling to find her own foothold and struggling with her own health issues, which have now been diagnosed by her grandson, Merlin Holland, as multiple sclerosis. And then Vivian was the only one of the Wilde family that survived past World War One, and had his own kind of interesting career as a translator. He's very much part of the London literary scene, but also, excuse me, my laptop just started sliding. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if I'd knocked anything into place. So yeah, so Vivian had his own story, and I just thought, gosh, it'd be interesting to follow them all and see how this worked, while also using all the fictional tools that a novelist does, which is bringing them into place, bringing them into contact with people that they may not have really met. So, for instance, in the fourth act of the book, Vivian meets a much older version of Lord Alfred Douglas, who is the other person who survived all this scandal. And so that was part of it, was just giving them their own room to tell their story.
You know, you mentioned his wife Constance, and she appears here as a really modern woman, a deeply modern woman. Though she struggled. I mean, she's ambitious, she's an idealistic, but she's vulnerable. How did your understanding of her evolve as you wrote, as you learned about her, as you did your research?
Yeah, for sure. So the first time I ever thought of Constance was in the 1997 Stephen Fry movie. I think it was 97. He made a movie about Oscar Wilde called Wilde, which is pretty great in its own way. Stephen Fry was the perfect actor to play Wilde. And of course, he cast Jude Law as Bosie, who was then his most beautiful. So that was perfect. Vanessa Redgrave was Oscar's mother, Lady Wilde. But I remember at the time looking at the character of his wife, played by Jennifer Ailey, and she just was kind of standing there sadly in the background or at the side, just sort of unhappy, vague, in a vague way about what was going on, but I had no idea who she was. And I remember thinking as I watched this movie back in 97, like, what kind of woman would have married Oscar Wilde? What kind of woman would Oscar Wilde have married? And the research, as you mentioned, just revealed to me that she was not just this quiet little housefrau who was waiting for him to come home from his assignations, but she was this very fierce and redoubtable feminist reformer. Her big issue was Victorian dress reform. She was trying to free women from their corsets. And I think most of the women who listen to this will be saying, give a big amen to that, because that was one of the things that was confining women at that point in a physical way. So she was very progressive, and she found in Oscar an equally progressive man who was very supportive of women's rights. And so the more I learned about it, the more I thought, okay, here's this really interesting woman who has been buried in Oscar's shadow, in effect, who's been hidden, all this. So it was a great fun to draw her out of those shadows and let people see her, because I feel like we haven't. There is a wonderful biography that came out of her about her a few years ago by Franny Moyle that talks about all that she did. She was an editor, she was a writer, Oscar considered her one of his collaborators, so she was very much an influence on his own work. So all this stuff had to come to fore. So I wanted a Constance who was, in the end, kind of Oscar's equal, who was ready to give and take with him, because I thought that makes the whole conflict more interesting and more complex. You know, he's not leaving his wife for an intellectual superior. He's leaving her because something has changed in his own relations to gender and all those other things. So for me, reclaiming Constance is one of the big goals of this book.
There was a very popular play it came out in the 90s, Gross Indecency.
Yes, Moses.
Yeah, I wondered if you, in your research, if you encountered that play.
Well, the research, the play is already there in the research, because I think, is it Moses Kaufman?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that the author's name? I think he drew directly from the record. So yes, the record of the trials is there, and it's there in what I call the entr'actes of the book. One of the things that came up when I was writing the book, my editor wasn't sure exactly what people would know about the Oscar Wilde scandal. What would they know about why he went to jail? And in the field research I did among friends, basically, I asked, what do you know about the scandal? And I was amazed how many people didn't know about the trial, didn't know why it had happened. So we created these entr'actes, which are just sort of conglomerations of letters and court testimony and other documents that convey what was happening. And yes, so the court testimony is in there too, the same thing that Moses Kaufman drew on for gross indecency, just to show what was happening in that courtroom, which was very interesting. It was a performance by Oscar Wilde, for the most part, that then went south when he made a kind of the wrong move, and everything went from there. He just wound up in prison, and yeah. But I tried to isolate the few moments where it went south, because this, I think for Oscar, this was another play, another performance. And then he got to the point where he couldn't control the performance anymore, and there we are. But I always encourage people who read the novel to go back to the original sources, including Gross Indecency and all those other texts, because it's fascinating to see.
Jeffrey, Gross Indecency. I think that would be a wonderful title for your memoir.
You haven't even read it yet, and you're already.
I know. I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't think mine indecencies have been gross enough. I feel like I could have been grosser with my indecency, honestly.
No, I wish that I had as well. But Jeffrey has a theater background, so I'm
yes,
sure
he does. I've seen Jeffrey in a play.
Have you?
Yes, I have. The
Oh
Gene
my
Pool.
gosh.
The Gene Pool, right? A long time ago for both of us. Yes. Yes.
Oh.
Back to the wilds.
Back to the wild. Well, so talking a little bit about, theatrical roots, the book subtitled The Novel in Five Acts nods to Wilde's background.
Sure.
How did that structure shape the novel's tone, pacing, and that sense of inevitability?
That's a great question. So when I first started having this idea for the book, I thought, gosh, the fate of the Wilde family is so tragic that I wasn't sure I could dwell there for the 2 years it usually takes me to push a book into the world. So then I started thinking about Oscar's own plays, which in so many instances kind of travel between comedy and tragedy. And I thought, okay, so what if we came at this tragedy through a comic lens? What would that look like? And then I got the idea of basically making it a play, a novelistic play to be sure. Originally it was going to be 4 acts, because Oscar's plays for the most part were 4 acts. And then I got to the end of the 4th act and I thought, it needs a 5th one. But the idea was to keep it in this high comedy register, which would keep people amused and laughing, hopefully, and in that Wilde vein, and then bring in the tragedy, have it kind of burble up as needed, and kind of live in that duo register. So that was the whole point. But it was the thought of doing it as a play was what allowed me to go forward with it, because then I thought, okay, this could be fun, trying to channel Oscar Wilde's voice, which I know is a completely impious and ballsy thing to do. But I thought of it from the start as a collaboration between me and Oscar, involuntary on his part, to kind of bring his own life into the world of his plays. So that was the challenge, and that was the fun.
Can you elaborate on that a bit? I mean, your prose often captures Wildean wit, and that quiet ache that is beneath it. How did you? And you mentioned you're spending 2 years with this, and how did you balance channeling Oscar's voice with maintaining your distinctive style?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, yeah, channeling Oscar. So in every moment of most of these acts, I'm trying to find the most amusing way of expressing what's going on. So I made sure to bring in very amusing characters, one of whom is Lady Wilde, Oscar's mother, who was a redoubtable figure in her own right. And there are two Lady Bracknell characters, for those who know Importance of Being Earnest. There are two kind of, bossy women. I love bossy women because they always change things whenever they walk into the room. So the idea of having Lady Bracknell, in effect, kind of wandering through Oscar's own life, that was so much fun for me, because she would be commenting on it in the same way that we would be today. But at the same time, I knew that there's things that be going beneath this brittle high comedy register. There's really sad and dark things happening, and that was where you bring in kind of this other voice, which would be, if you're watching a Wilde play, it would be what the actors bring to it. And Jeffrey knows about this, what the actors bring to it, their own subtext. They bring to every line they deliver, there's something going on underneath. So that was the part I had to convey, and that was sort of my voice in a way, but my voice in a quieter register, just sort of talking about what's burbling beneath these epigrams and these witticisms. It's like there's something else going on. Yeah, that's me in there. But in the end, it's just a collaboration between me and Oscar, and it was such a hoot to do that.
Lady Bracknell, do you have a favorite quote, Lou?
Oh, yes. To lose one parent is a misfortune. To lose two parents is smacks of carelessness. I don't have that exactly, but yes.
Yeah.
But also I'm very, my ideal Importance of Being Earnest is the 1952-53 version, film version with Edith Evans, and she took a simple line called, it was, and the as a line, Lady Bracknell says, a handbag, question mark. It's not even a laugh line, but by the time Edith Evans gets through with it, she just goes up and down the scale. It's like an operatic scale, and it becomes immortally funny the way she says a handbag. So that's a thing that actors can bring to a line. So that's, whenever I see that line, whenever I think of Edith Evans. But there's so many wonderful lines in that play. Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing too. A handbag. That
a
is
handbag.
Such a handbag.
And then she just slides up. Yeah. It's yeah. Yeah. She is the gold standard of Lady Bracknell's. Yeah, for sure.
Love it. So Oscar, so we talked a little bit about Lord Alfred Douglas, and the relationship that he shared with Oscar, and it's been dissected and dramatized quite a bit. But what new emotional truths, Lee, were you hoping to uncover when you were revisiting their relationship?
Yeah, well, I learned a lot over the course of researching this book. I want to start with an anecdote. Some years ago, a friend of mine who's a composer was wanting me to write a libretto for a tragic or a romantic opera about Oscar and Bosie. And I remember, the more I learned about it, it's like, I don't think this is going to work as a romantic opera, because it's not a grand romance, but it's very intense. But one of the things I learned, for instance, is that their sexual relationship ended within about a year of their meeting. So what kept them together ever after, almost to the very end of Oscar's life, was equally intense, but not sexual. It was codependent. It was passionate. They fought and they argued and they broke up all the time, and they kept coming back to each other. They couldn't quit each other, to quote that famous line from
Brokeback Mountain.
Brokeback Mountain. Yes, they couldn't quit each other. But what bound them together was not sex, but something equally as intense. So that was really interesting. And it ruined them both in some ways. Oscar was the one, of course, who died early in 1900, November 30th, 1900. But Bosie, though he lived on for another 40 plus years, never kind of recovered from being the center of that scandal, I would say. And you could also argue that his development was frozen just by being Oscar's mistress, in effect. So that was the one thing I clung to, because Bosie, Lord Alfred, is the most challenging character to bring to life in this, because it's our instinct to hate him because he did such he tore Oscar out of his family, and then he betrayed Oscar and all these things. And Oscar, of course, with De Profundis, kind of ensured that Bosie would always be the villain in this. So I had to like kind of locate the guy who was just this very young man who was swept up by an older man and struggling to find his own ways. So that's my way of saying a very complicated relationship, which changed them both in ways that they didn't even, I think, understand at first. Yeah, and here we are today, still talking about them.
Still talking about them.
Let's talk about the settings in the novel. There's Norfolk's countryside, the Italian coast, the trenches of World War One, London, Soho.
Mm-hmm.
You trace both a family's journey and a nation's transformation. How did you approach weaving private heartbreak into a broader historical fabric?
I just follow the family. I just follow them. So the first act, as you said, is in Norfolk, and that's where they were actually having a summer holiday in 1892, and that's where Oscar and Bosie, according to historical record, finally became kind of a couple, finally became lovers for real. Because Oscar had lovers, but Oscar had sexual partners, but he'd never had a romantic partner in the same way as Bosie. So this kind of changed everything going forward. So the question of the first act is, when will Constance kind of figure out what's going on between her husband and this very handsome young visitor who actually was spending the holiday with them. So that's why it starts in Norfolk, because that's where they were, that's where everything began. And then it travels to Italy because that's where Constance had to retreat in the wake of the scandal. That's where she tried to kind of reconfigure her life. Her two boys are there as well. That's when she also has to make a medical decision about her own body. And then it transfers to Northeast France during the World War One, because ironically enough, improbably enough, Oscar's older son became a World War One sniper, which had so much to do with his own sense of shame and humiliation over his father's thing, and his need to be hyper masculine in response. So he became a sniper. So we got to spend some time in the trenches. And then it transferred over to 1920s London, because that's where Vivian ended up. The rest of his family was dead by then, and he ended up in that that post-war London artsy bohemian world, but also waiting to meet Lord Alfred Douglas, who of course is still around. So I just followed the characters and to where they were, which created, I will say, a larger research burden than I'm used to doing. I'm used to having things set in one place. In this case, I had to go to, I'm now counting it, 1, 2, 3, 4 different places and figure out what things would have looked like. But it was, the story seemed to demand it. I just had to follow these people where they ended up.
Did you physically go to these places, or?
Oh gosh, I wish I could have done that. I wish I could have afforded that. But one thing I've learned long ago, being a historical novelist, is that most of these places, historical terms are already gone. So Victorian London is mostly gone. And of course, any kind of dugout in Northeast France is gone. So Liguria is maybe still around. I would have loved to make a trip there, but no, what I've learned is that you find these lost worlds through books. So I have a study shelf in the Library of Congress where Jeffrey works. And yeah, I just find it through research. I find these places through research. So that's what I'm telling myself. But I wish I could have gone, because you can write that stuff off, right, Jeffrey? Yeah. All those trips is for your art. You write it off.
But then you can go and discover that those places have changed dramatically.
I was going to say, I'm sure Liguria has changed dramatically. So part of me thinks you just kind of, you just go with the research and let it lead you. So, but I would love to go to Norfolk. I would love to go to all those places. So,
how long did it take you to write The Wilds, Lou?
About my usual span is about 2 years. So that's kind of how it worked. And it's about, I would say, 3 months of upfront research just to get to a point where I can walk around in this world. And then as I start to write the book, and then the book tells me what I still need to know, which is often considerable. and I never feel like I've learned enough. I never feel like an expert about anything that I write about, people or places or time periods. I learn enough just to tell the story. And yeah, so if you were to, challenge me to Oscar Wilde trivia over a game of darts, I probably would. I'm sure I would lose. I learn what I need to know, but I learn enough, and it's always and that is part of the joy of it too, is just being invited into these realms, that I've never been before.
There, of course, there's the telling from a historical perspective, which you just touched on in this sense that you feel that you don't um, perhaps feel comfortable enough knowing as much as you feel that you should know. But one of the things that I think that you do so beautifully in all of your storytelling is sort of that emotional undercurrent of the characters in the world within which they live and their relationships. In this particular book, there's an undercurrent of forgiveness that runs throughout
Mhm.
between lovers, parents, children. Was
Yeah,
that a theme that emerged naturally? Is that something that you set out to write about from the get-go, or is that something that just happened organically?
I think organically. I mean, here's the thing: I never set out to write any about a theme at all. I have a story in mind, and it's often left to smart people like you to figure out what the theme is, because I don't necessarily see it myself. So I can see that forgiveness is part of it, because in the end, it became a book about a family that wants to remain together against all odds. And how does a family can't remain together, it seems to me, unless they practice forgiveness with each other. And you could argue that the whole final act, the fifth act, which I didn't know I was going to write until I wrote it, is an exercise in forgiveness. It's Vivian sort of looking back at his family history and forgiving them on the way to healing, and maybe making an alternative path that they could all have followed together and stayed together. But I think forgiveness is essential. I think it's essential for a writer too, to kind of be able to see his characters in full and to see them even when they're making really bad decisions, as Oscar did more than once over the course of his life. Trying to understand why, and trying to understand what was going on behind that. But um, so yeah, I think we have to be forgiving of our characters, but also clear about them, clear about what's going on.
His Wilde's legacy, his life ended in scandal. But there's sort of a reverence for him now. I mean, how do you see his life and work resonating with what's going on in our world today, our current moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. First of all, I think he would be delighted to know how famous he still is.
Hmm.
How 125 years after his death, the fact that we're still talking about it, we're still writing books about him, I think he'd be delighted and thrilled to know that was happening, because of course he was an attention whore. He loved attention. He loved people talking about him until he didn't like that. So I think a couple of things at work. He still feels very modern to us. It's partly because he trafficked in wit and humor, like the way that Mark Twain's can still feel very modern. But I think he also trafficked in paradox. So much of his wit is built around paradox, which means that you basically say one thing, then you say the other thing, and which means you don't kind of lean in any direction. You end up in some sort of complicated middle ground where you won't kind of commit yourself to one creed, one position or another. And maybe that feels particularly appropriate for today's age, where we can't quite attach ourselves, young people in particular, because the youngs love Oscar Wilde. I hear from them all the time. And there are all these, there are bars named after him. There's perfume named after him. He's still very much present in a commercial way and in a cultural way. And I think it's because, he's not Victorian. He's not anything. He's just Oscar himself. He's his own perfect creation. And so I think that's why he lives on. I think he will live on. I think even after we young folks are gone, I think Oscar Wilde will still be a presence. I will say that in terms of his work, what will live on is the importance of being earnest more than any of his plays. I think that is just a perfect farcical creation. And of course, the picture of Dorian Gray. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you think? I wonder what would happen if you could have put Oscar Wilde and Truman Capote into a room together.
That's a wonderful question. Gosh, I think Oscar would have beaten that, would have won that contest.
Yeah.
If it were a wit contest, because but I wouldn't bet money against either of them. I think they would have enjoyed each other though, at some level. And I think there are so many. I think Oscar would have enjoyed Gore Vidal. I think he would have loved Dorothy Parker. There's so many people I think he would have loved to hang out with, because essentially he was generous in his nature. He wanted people. He always wanted people to shine, and he was generous with his money, with his praise, and so I think I would love to kind of transport him in a time machine here and let him see people being unapologetically gay, unapologetically LGBTQ. I mean, I think he would have been fascinated by the transgender movement. I think he would have been all over that. At the same time, I think he would have been Me Too'd at some point in recent years, because, of course, the rent boys he consorted with in the 1890s were boys by our modern standards. So there would be that issue too. He liked young men to cavort with. So yeah, so lots of complicated stuff, but I like the idea of him just being transported here, and it's like, here we go. Here's what's going on. We've got gay people on TV. We've got yeah. I think he would be astonished, but delighted to see how far we've gone. Even as I say that, though, we know how tenuous this is. And one of the things, when you write historical novels, you think you're journeying back safely into the past, and then the present comes and finds you. And so the recent Supreme Court decision, for instance, to let gay marriage stand, the fact that was so suspenseful says a lot about where we are today. But I feel confident that Oscar and Bosie would have married. I don't know how happy their marriage would have been, but I think it would have lasted in that kind of weird way that their actual relationship lasted.
Yeah, if they were living today, I wonder if they would have been great reality stars.
Maybe they I think Oscar would have been all over reality TV. Absolutely. No, I think he loved being a star. So I think he would have relished all the different media that would be afforded to him today. Yeah, I think absolutely. So too.
Does he have
go ahead, Jeffrey.
Does he have a contemporary counterpart in your view? Is there someone in popular culture who reminds you?
Reminds me of Oscar. My first answer is no. But now I need to think on it. I'm going to throw it back to you guys. Is there anybody out there who reminds you of Oscar?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I really don't think so.
I can't think of anybody.
Someone that's who is that smart and so witty. I'd have to
witty, and also the literary capacity that he had, the ability to write in different forms. And I think that'd be a really tough one. I mean, I think Gore Vidal comes close, but the late Gore Vidal, and Truman Capote, yeah, in terms of that combination of wit and literary talent. But yeah, I don't know if anybody these days rises to that level. We have to think about that. Jeffrey, you have any ideas?
I don't know. I was thinking about it, and there are people who are sort of outrageous and out there and witty, but there's he was just the literary.
I mean, I'm thinking like RuPaul or Billy Porter, or people who are sort of outrageous and fun, but they not in literary terms, not in kind of literary basis. So
yeah, a lot of great performers, but not within the realm of literary.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Yeah, we'll ponder that. We will ponder that. The three of us.
We will do that.
I will get back to you. I'll call you tomorrow morning, first thing, with
the list.
With candidates. Yes, for the new Oscar Wilde. Yeah,
wake up early.
So Jeffrey touched a little bit on Oscar's legacy. What do you hope, Lou, that readers ultimately will carry with them once they turn the last page of The Wilds?
That's a great question. I think the same thing that I hope they take away from everything I write, which is that even very famous people, and I've written about Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and Jackie Kennedy and people like that, that even the people that we think we know, there's something we don't know about them, which means there's something we don't know about every human being that goes on this planet. So yeah, if you thought you know all about Jackie, if you thought you know about Oscar, Abraham Lincoln, here's something you might not have known. So I think that opens us to the complexity of people, the fact that we don't have all the answers, we don't know all the facts, and that to me is a wonderful kind of, I don't know what's the word, multiplicity, ambiguity that just complicates our notion of how people are, because people are never necessarily what they seem on the surface.
For certain, they really are, I think. And that's what makes for good literature.
Right? That's where we come in, we authors. Yeah, we come in and we kind of explore that world where that doesn't necessarily get, again, into the historical record, that doesn't necessarily get put down on paper. So we go into those rooms where nobody was writing notes, and we write the notes and we tell the story. And that to me is what makes this, what we do, so much fun.
But Lou, we are at the end of our time together. It has gone by swiftly.
Right. Yes.
But before we part ways, I'm going to ask you that obnoxious question that everyone always asks writers, and that is, what's next?
What's next? That is, that's not obnoxious. It's a natural question. So I can't, I'm legally enjoined from answering that question. Well, not really, but anyway. So I'm in the midst of a book. What makes it complicated is that my whole publishing team was fired like 3 days before The Wilds came out. So I'm between publishers. I'm, for the second time in my career, an orphaned author. So we're still figuring out where I go and what story we'll tell. But I will say what I'm working on now is another Victorian England story and another fraught marriage. And that's all I can say at this point. But I'm looking forward, and I love being back in that world, that Victorian world, because it's fun.
Lou, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to talk to you guys, and I will see you again in some fashion or other.
Absolutely. So, gentle listeners, until next time, for Well-Read Magazine's Inside Voices, I'm Robert Gwaltney.
And I'm Jeffrey Dale Lofton. And remember, to be creative is to be courageous. Thanks for joining us.